I'd like to begin by thanking the chairman and ranking member for convening this important hearing and our witnesses for your testimony. I know it's getting into the afternoon. Really appreciate you sticking through this. I'm proud to represent Northwestern and Central Illinois, where we've got farming, urban, and rural constituents. Many of our constituents face the challenge of poor quality broadband. They have service that meets the definition of broadband set by the FCC, but the service is not sufficient to meet their needs. Yesterday, I introduced the bipartisan ReConnecting Rural America Act along with my colleagues in this committee, Representative Nunn from Iowa, Representative Craig from Minnesota, along with Representative LaHood. This bill sets standards to target broadband investment to unserved and underserved communities. The approach my bill takes will ensure that underserved constituents can benefit from ReConnect grants and loans, just like unserved constituents. Currently, broadband providers can access ReConnect funds to service areas that are 50% unserved. Now, my bill increases the standard to 75%, with minimum service speeds of 100 up, or 100 down and 20 up, with a preference for service areas with 90% unserved. And finally, the bill sets mandatory build-out speeds, what we've been talking about here today, 100 by 100 symmetrical. I'm thankful, Mrs. Bloomfield, you mentioned that in your opening statement today. So I'll begin with you. Could you speak to why this standard needs to be met?
There are so many reasons the standard needs to be met, but I would also, I think I would start off with the fact that, again, it's looking at current usage, current network, capacity, and really thinking about making sure that we build for what we need right now, but also what we need in a few years from now. And so I think the ability to say, we're not going to get this type of funding again, so let's make sure that what we are not doing is turning around in 3 years and digging back up and looking to upload the speeds and increase the speeds. Let's go ahead and ensure that we're putting what is probably the most logical target in place as a start. So again, we commend you for your leadership and think that there's so many things in your piece of legislation that are actually very commendable.
Thank you for that. I plan to introduce the House version of the Access to Capital Creates Economic Strength and Supports Rural America Act, or the Access Rural America Act, alongside Representative Tiffany and Senators Baldwin and Ernst. The bicameral and bipartisan bill will provide regulatory relief to small rural broadband providers, allowing them to focus on delivering broadband to the most remote areas of our country. So if I could continue, Mrs. Bloomfield, could you share with the committee some of the potential impacts of this, and also maybe some of the stresses that we see in the rollout of rural broadband?
So this is an area where your leadership is really important, because I will say that when we think about Sarbanes-Oxley, it was put in place because of large corporate interests, large publicly traded companies. My members are community-based providers, but if you've got a commercial company that is locally held, they maybe have 490 shareholders, and somebody in the family decides to gift to somebody else in the family some of their shares, suddenly you hit 500, and all of these requirements from the SEC kick in. That is hundreds of thousands of dollars a year annually in terms of things that you need to file that are compliance oriented. Then you need to get auditors, and then you need to get lawyers. And again, what is, the regs are understandable, but they are really meant for publicly traded companies. And what they are doing in some of these small towns is they are really having people focus spending money on dealing with these regulations reporting rather than actually being able to build the broadband. So greatly appreciate your introduction of the legislation.
Thank you for that. Mr. Stroop, you mentioned in your testimony the need to incentivize satellite internet providers. In the past, there have been concerns for providing federal funds for satellite internet given the limitations to the technology. With technological advancements and the introduction of low Earth orbit satellite networks, have those concerns for satellite network capacity changed?
Thank you for the question, and I think that they certainly have. Given the advances in satellite technology, the ever-increasing speeds, the ever-increasing capacity, as I'd mentioned in my testimony, companies are providing speeds up to 200 megabits per second. They continue to launch additional satellites just to, 10 years ago, there were 1,000 satellites. Today, there are approximately 8,000 satellites, just to give you a sense of the expansion in the numbers of satellites and the same capability. 10 years ago, the speeds were much different than they are today. So I think that that's an argument, a relic of the past, quite frankly.
As the ranking member on the Space Subcommittee, I appreciate you here and there, and I yield back the balance of my time.